I am joined by David Rosenberg, historian, archivist, and activist. And every time we meet and talk, I think we have so much to talk about. And that just seems truer every day. So thank you for sitting down with me. We're going to really talk about your experience, your research, and your activism within the historical work that you've done. And I don't want to put any boundaries really that are artificial on what we're talking about. So let's just let it go where it goes, if you're up for that. And I wanted to start with some general questions really about archives and the discipline of history. And just broadly, who gets left out of the archive and who controls that? Maybe we can start there.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, I'm thinking about this. I mean, I was an archivist at the University of Pittsburgh for almost 20 years. And before that, I had a lot to do with the French archives for my dissertation research. So, I mean, I'm all about archives. I love them. I have a special feeling for them. There is a certain amount. The question about who controls is obviously a good question. Private entities like corporations, foundations, they can basically, since it's their own archives and it's their property, they can pretty much control who has access to it, how it's used. Subject to copyright, things kind of dive in the midst of these exclusive proprietary rights. I mean, they can't monkey around with something that's controlled by copyright laws in different ways. But then the public archives have a different regime. Usually there's a state or public political entity that controls, that makes laws about the archives, especially their own administrative records. So, like for instance, in Amiens, at the departmental archives, their procedures are controlled by administrative regulations and ultimately by laws of the French state have an overarching control over that. So that immediately, segues into a problem that somebody who wants to be researching the history of the Jews during the occupation might run into and will run into. There are two, as I see, there are two basic questions here. One is what's called delay of communicability in French, delay de communicabilité, and what this involves is putting a certain term hold on records after they get turned in. Can they be seen immediately? No, they can be seen. Well, even after processing, there might be a delay of 30 years after the date of the turn-in or the expiration of the term of the official, or it might be 60 years, or it might be, in France, 90 or 120. So you could have some very substantial delay de communicabilité in France. And in fact, there's the moral to this story. If you wanted to find out a lot about the Jews of the Department of the Somme during World War II, the Departmental Archives Series W, which was the records of the prefect concerning that period, were not available for 60 years after the liberation, 1944, 2004. So, how do you find out who the Jews were in the Department of the Somme during the occupation? It's a head scratcher. And a journalist from the Courrier Picard, the local newspaper, said, well, I know that there was a roundup of French Jews, a fairly large one, the largest one in our area, on January 4th, 1944, and days following that, so-called raffle roundup. But I can't look at the departmental archives of the Somme which include Amiens, and the L'Oise, the neighboring department to the south, are not accessible. They're under one of these delays. This is in 1993, okay? So 10 years before the delay de communicabilité has been lifted. So they tell this story about this journalist. I've been talking to him a little bit too, and his article was very important because it tried to crack, I guess, an iceberg or whatever that that was otherwise impenetrable. And so he had to go to Paris, okay? And he went to Paris and he talked to somebody at what was turning into the Memorial of the Shoah. The only thing that they really had that could help with this particular problem, they had these little receipt books that when the Jews were sent to Drancy, the transshipment camp north of Paris, before they were sent to Auschwitz, mostly, when they got there, they were shaken down. You know, they were like this, sometimes strip search. I mean, it was an abusive operation. They took their jewels and money, you know, cash that they had on hand, but they made out these little receipts to them as if they were going to give it back at some point. It was all for show. And these little receipt books to help this journalist find some names. Okay, so he got a bunch of names from the Somme and the Oise of people who were rounded up at that time, and then he came back to Amiens and printed them up in the newspaper. Okay, an incomplete list, but a start. They had the name, the age, the address of the person, and the amount that was receipted and so forth. So that was it, okay? That's as far as you could get with that. In 2004, this Series W was finally open. But what I'm talking about is this delay de communicabilité, which enables, in the words of one colleague of this journalist, he says, the archives are there to preserve memory, and in the process, they help bury it.
So we're talking specifically about what was happening with these records in France and for how long they were classified so that researchers couldn't access them. This is true of archives in the United States. This is true in other parts of the world. And that's why in 2021, we're still learning about the Holocaust. This is something that is not clear to a lot of people who don't realize how long the delay is to access official documents, you know, of an event. And sometimes things are classified for longer, even private papers, if there's a concern that they'll reflect badly on individuals who are mentioned by name in archives. It's complicated. It's really complicated. And I've been thinking about this a lot as we look at history happening before our eyes, which certainly has been happening in the United States, and historians are asked to reflect upon it. I have some reluctance, even though I'm certainly capable of reflecting upon it, but also that feeling that I just don't have the information I need yet. And I think that's part of our training, is to rely on documentation that we don't access until many years after an event. Something that I've been thinking about in this moment when knowledge of the Holocaust is so relevant to what's happening all around us.
Well, it's a big issue, and it delayed. You know, you'd say, well, I mean, there's the problem of whether people are even curious to know about the Jews. I mean, this journalist have to take a certain amount of initiative to, you know, go out and overcome the temporary roadblocks of the delays. You know, but I was going to mention, I hope it won't, you know, detract from this particular point of emphasis, but the other problem that I encountered was an almost a high sensitivity about names that would about naming people, a more exacerbated sense of privacy rights over in Europe, then it happens to also be conveniently obfuscating, if I can say that, because it winds up kind of impeding access to the actual identities of people. Can I give you an example of this?
Sure.
Names. Well, in about 2012, about a year or two into my project over there, I started working with the departmental archives to get more Jewish content on their website, including more stuff that they had, and also more stuff from private hands. And different individuals would have given up their stuff to scan and make available. So when I started to do that, I got excited. I thought, oh, because I had seen all these lists of people over there, the Jews, the lists that the French government under German tutelage kept. Finally, even getting the names out would be good in and of itself, and then people are going to start to know that there were people there, and it's going to be the kind of open sesame. But no, it didn't turn out that way. They scanned the documents, these lists, and then though they they explained to me that they can't reveal online on the internet name lists, list nominative. There's the other thing, that bookend thing of the delay de communicabilité and taboo on list nominative. So in the end, all they could put up there was that there is such a list in the archives and that you can see it in the archives. So
Only by going to the archives.
only by going to the archives. I mean, at the end of the road, maybe you can see where this is going. The end of the road is going to the jewsofthesum.com, okay? Because now it doesn't matter if you go to the archives or not. You can, you can sit in your room and access this stuff. So, and that's the whole push of things, is to get things out of the box and into the public forum. I mean, because, you say, in the emergency of today and so forth, and the issue of, how are you going to get to people? Well, I think you have to put it on the table in front of them. I mean, you have to lay it before them. You can't count on them to be curious. I mean, I was reflecting on this. We are all not curious in a lot of areas. I mean, you could say, well, why? This is so important. Yes, and it isn't. It is so important because it's life and death for people. But there are whole areas which we don't know anything about, and although I agree with the general proposition that history can be a powerful teacher of lessons, there also has to be this sort of like a curiosity and a context to it, because I think there's a basic let's say, I don't know, obligation or challenge to put before people things that they may not find intrinsically, curiosity provoking or whatever, curious, intrinsically interesting. I was thinking about the two survivors who passed away, Shulamit and Mr. Weinreb there from McKeesport. And the general problem of the passing of the survivors and the question of legacy, carrying on. Um, and the idea I had, maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is just too too banal for words, but the idea I had is that the archives are testimony. The archives witness, okay, and it's really true. When you peer into the documents, and I think that's why I'm personally partial to bringing the documents forward, like in the exhibit which the Holocaust Center was kind enough to have, and which is, had a great run both on two coasts. I think that you have to let them speak. I myself, a historian, and then shifting over to archiving, I kind of get impatient with people telling me, okay, they go into the archives and so they do the research, and they come out and then they give you tell you about it. I mean, that's fine. I myself enjoy looking at the documents. Yeah, I'm going to tie this in with the value of history. Apart from like lessons of,
Right.
Nazi Germany and so forth, which they're there. The other thing about it is it impacts you as a human being to, first of all, get out of yourself and get into some other world for a time being, and to start to puzzle about it. It alerts you to both the possibilities of action and the limitations of action, which I think are very useful, existentially, because we can't, not, the spectrum between the executioner and the resistor, there's a lot of ground. That's one thing I learned from my work in Amiens. There are some interesting questions of responsibility there that can be helpful to people. But you also have to recognize, and you don't have to make excuses for people or anything like that. You have to recognize the contexts in which people operate. Here I was a leader of the Darfur Coalition in Pittsburgh for 12 or 13 years, and it faded at the end. But at the outset, there were a lot of people telling other people, don't be bystanders, be upstanders. And the whole, it came out of that Holocaust educational out of that culture of never again. And,
Never again,
and
right.
there was a lot of interest among Jewish teens, high school. I worked with a lot of wonderful people, that I thought, it made you feel good to see the outpouring of concern, and people had for a remote place, on the globe, in Darfur and in Sudan, but in a way, there was only so many thousand people had written so many thousand. Well, we collected 14,000 postcards from Pittsburgh and delivered them to Bush and then Obama, and but after a while, the difficulties of the task and the lack of kind of leverage in there was, became apparent, and other concerns supervened for people. In Israel, there was another thing, and there was a crisis in the Middle East, and that. So I don't know. I just, that gave me a chastened view of the possibilities and that's why I'm talking about the limits and the possibilities. I don't feel like you should despair, totally of being able to do anything. That's wrong. But it's also, the more you immerse yourself sometimes in the actual of fibers of things, it's there's a lot more. There's a bigger field of activity out there. I can't explain it anymore, but more than that, and maybe that's half baked.
Yeah, well, I may add something because the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is part of a coalition called the Together We Remember Coalition of Centers and Museums, Holocaust museums, memorials to genocide. It's a global network, and we met over the past 3 days. So what you're talking about is fresh for me because we had people speaking to the Rohingya experience, people talking about the Uyghurs, talking about genocides happening now that have been recognized as genocide, right? Hearing people from inside those experiences talking about what their needs are. And one woman said, we think about never again. That doesn't work for us. We're in the midst of this. We think about no longer,
right,
not never again. So,
right.
I mean, once we really have cast a wider net and look beyond Holocaust specific and listen to other people's experiences, listen to witnesses to other genocides, we realize we have a lot to contribute to each other, but also that we have so much work to do. And the work is very hard, as you say. Part of the problem is, echoing what you also said before, people are not curious. I mean, right now, we're in a very difficult time right now with a global pandemic. People are really struggling. It's easy to be focused on ourselves. And for some of us, we need to be focused on ourselves. And that just exacerbates a lack of curiosity about other people's experiences. And part of it is we're tired. We are really tired. So the hope that I find is that there are so many people who really care about this. And I don't want to go too far along that path because that could be hours and hours of just commiserating, right? Commiserating about how vital, how incredibly important this work is, but how hard it is to make progress. And it's just tiny, tiny increments. But when you talk about the curiosity and the experience of being in the archives, this is an experience that we both have had and we share. And I understand just the excitement. It's like a scavenger hunt, trying to track down pieces of this story. And when we're trained as historians, we're trained to follow what we find in the archive, not to go there with an idea and look for evidence to support that idea, but to be guided by what the archive is telling us. And it really is such a wonderful experience. And I just, as you were talking, was having all of these memories of my own experiences in archives in different parts of the world and in different parts of the United States. I'm wondering if through your work in Amiens, you have been able to restore that local kind of curiosity about what happened there, about the history, because you've done so much work in Amiens with teachers and with various other people there, museums, students. Have you restored their curiosity for their own history?
To some extent, in the areas that I've probed. I've probed basically two areas. When I went over to do my dissertation, it was on the Protestants of that area. And the Protestants broke away from the Catholics in the 16th century. And then I had the same sort of issues. I mean, the more I look back on it, the more I see that there was the same gestalt present for me, and I think I contributed a lot to the interest and awareness of Protestantism, although I don't see a burgeoning of Protestant 16th century studies, which at the time that I was working on the Protestants, I got in touch with the Protestant community there, not at all the genetic biological descendants of the 16th century. And well, a lot of them, the Protestants, were expelled from France at the end of the 17th century when the Edict of Nantes, which was permitted two religions was revoked. But at the time that I did that, I thought, how come these people don't know anything about the Protestants? I mean these people. I mean my friends, that I met there, and there weren't any markers for it. There's a magnificent Gothic cathedral there, one of the jewels of European architecture, twice as big as Notre Dame, twice as inside as big as Notre Dame, and built in the 13th century. I mean, anyway, it's marvelous. It deserves to be whatever a world heritage site, whatever. And but there's no sort of trace of the Protestants who kind of turned their back on that, and opted for something else. And so this kind of bothered me, and when I started to, once I got through my dissertation, which was trying to explain why weavers and woolcombers were more attracted to Protestantism than some other groups in the town. Once I got through that, the first thing I wrote in French, and it was about how in 1568 there was a massacre of Protestants in the town, Catholic mobs. They were trying to prevent a return of Protestant worship services, which had been held briefly in the town between the First and Second Civil Wars, the mid-1560s. They didn't want them to get reinstall themselves. So the best way to do that is to, show them you mean business. In the aftermath of this massacre, which numbers are hard to get. They supposedly killed 100 men, women, and children altogether, or maybe 120, so the estimates, contemporaries varied, but everybody agreed that something bad happened. And you can see that something bad happened because in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, in the Catholic baptismal registers, where they record the baptisms, all of a sudden in April, May 1568, you start seeing little HUs, HUQs in the margins of the thing. And then I noticed, what these were. They meant Huguenots. They were Huguenots, and there were babies who were not being baptized for the first time. They were babies who had been baptized Protestant and now were being taken by their parents to the Catholic parish church to be sacramentally reintegrated into the Catholic Church. That's sort of what I wanted to get at, rather than why some groups were more attracted. I wanted to kind of get at what people experienced, and not enter into a kind of sort of second level historiographical. I don't know. In course of time, I've come to realize that I thought of myself as a witness to a crime.
Yes, and yes, a witness to the people too, to what
right,
what individuals experienced.
Right. So that was. I didn't realize that at the time. I was, like you said, I was following the thing, and I would be delighted when I found the signature. You recognize this, mm-hmm. of Protestants in the notary acts or the will of one, or sometimes you had a recorded statement from either a court case or the town council, so you could hear a voice and you could see a signature. There weren't any photographs. That was for the fiches later on, but the principle was the same. And so I followed where it led, and it didn't lead to. I have book. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do with them, because I did manage to labor and labor, as they say, and bring forth the mouse. I have, carved out some, articles, and I've written, but I've written, all of them have been in French to the local French and published in local historical society. And sometimes I say to myself, "What's the matter, chicken? You can't, you don't want to face the juried articles of the big reviews." But aside from the enjoyment of the challenge of trying to write something in French, I also have just come to see myself as somebody who's seen something in their closet, not their closet. I mean, I don't make it. They've done a wonderful job preserving so much stuff. You could turn the pages of these 16th century deliberations of the town council. I don't think the city council of Pittsburgh has saved its records that well. There are probably huge gaps. But so the point being that I now see that I witness that that's why it gave me this thought about the archives being témoignage, testimony, and to be witness. And then, so if somebody goes there and brings them forth, but not homogenized and processed and whipped into a colorful narrative necessarily, making it maybe very beautiful or elegant, but at second hand, there's something more witnessing about the materials themselves. So like to jump ahead, when we did the exhibit in Amiens of Who Was a Jew, the French version, one of the things that they did over there, and I have some video clips from it, is the theater group over there. This is my thought to do. The theater group over there enacted a found play that I found in the archive. So it's like a play. It wasn't a play really. It was the minutes of a meeting of the provisional administrators, who were French civilians who were appointed to dispose of Jewish property and to turn them over into non-Jewish hands. But they had a lot of questions about the procedures and so forth. So there was a meeting of these provisional administrators and the German representative of the German military authority, which was occupying the north of France, and the prefect, the structure of the French civilian government. There was a meeting in which they bandied back and forth these problems, like, well, what if the Jew doesn't want to sell? I mean, they're sort of like word for word type things there. So I thought, wow, that's kind of a absurd play. It's sort of like a black humor. I tried to actually pitch it to a theater company in Paris that was playing Ionesco for year after year after year. And the guy looked at it and said, he agreed with me. It was a grim type of thing. But so I didn't succeed there, but I did have the, satisfaction of watching this sort of skit sort of performed briefly by students at the University of Picardy's drama club at the opening of the French exhibit over there. But I mean, that's what I mean by a witness. It's a witness. It's sometimes it's quite vivid, and I want to sort of watch the people watching it from the audience, from the film that we have. So people can't be expected to know about it if it's buried in the archives in Paris. And I made a great discovery there, and it sounds like I'm bragging a little bit too much here.
You restored local history of the Jews to Amiens. So
right.
I mean, that's what you did. So when you say that, it's not bragging, because it's what you did. And when I first saw your exhibit, and first saw the work that you're doing, I was so taken with it because it is activism to restore
Mhm.
Jewish history to a place where it would have just disappeared. And we talked about it before, and we'll get together again soon to talk about photographs of Jews from Amiens and about how you were able to really tell a story that would have been lost. It's so important because the archives, in addition to being witnesses, are our protection against Holocaust denial. That's our line of defense because it was so well documented in all the places where it happened. And with the fall of the Soviet Union, all of those archives became available. Sometimes not, sometimes they're open, sometimes they're closed. And with enough scholars who speak those languages, as you speak French, who can get into those archives and tell them what they say, tell us, the rest of us who don't know those languages, what those archives say. And it's an essential piece of documenting the crimes of the Holocaust, telling an accurate history of what happened. And in the case of your work in Amiens, you can put that in front of all those people in Amiens. So you restore the memories of the Jews who were in Amiens, who were lost in the Holocaust, and also make sure that younger generations there, and we're talking 3 generations, 4 generations later, no, these people were there. You're walking the same streets.
Right.
I love this about your work. I mean, when I saw the exhibit for the first time, as you know, we were there together. I was just
Right.
like,
The Temple,
wow.
Temple Emmanuel,
Right. In
the
Temple
South.
Emmanuel in the South Hills in Pittsburgh. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, I've had a lot. My daughter put the exhibit online on a website. I don't think I've talked very much about it during our discussion here, but
Hmm.
there were a lot of other things. There were original documents already online, and she surprised me on Father's Day in this past year, in 2020, by putting the exhibit that was at Temple Emmanuel online. And at that point, we got a real uh, surge of interest in the website, which is jewsofthesum.com.
And yeah, we'll make sure that when we
Yeah, yeah, and
give
it's
people access to this conversation, we'll make sure they have
yeah,
that link.
sure. I don't want to be.
No.
It's already on your on featured. Thanks to Jackie and you on the on your homepage of the Holocaust Center, which we appreciate greatly. Um, Lately, what happened was there was some publicity in the French newspaper, and as a result, the Amiens newspaper. As a result, we've had a real surge of use of the visits to the site by people locally. Which is really, I was kind of almost taken by surprise by all the interest in the U.S. Shows how out to lunch I am, I guess. But I mean, it's a lot in English. We recently put some stuff in French on the roundup page, and that's kind of how I was able to kind of leverage more coverage over there because it coincided with a commemoration of the roundup, and then I have the testimonies, the witness statements in French there, so it's good for the students. And my only question is sort of like, how do you build on, increasing awareness so it's not evanescent? I kept thinking about, there's that famous statement about Hitler, who remembers the Armenians.
Right.
I guess it was Hitler or one of those.
Attributed to Hitler, yes.
Attributed to Hitler. And it's not the same at all, but I sort of thought like, well, who remembers the Protestants? I mean, their suffering was different. It wasn't as well. That's another thing you need to avoid is
Right.
this invidious comparison type of thing, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but who remembers? It's if I could, I was toying with trying to make an exhibit for that, for that. But I don't have, I don't have photographs or anything, but I do have some signatures, interestingly enough. And I don't know. I don't want to seem like a dilettante here, and it's not really that. I just think here's a place, a medium small town in France, and size city, and here's some buried minority histories that can open up minds and maybe some hearts or something. If there are refugees coming in, there's a problem of the Muslim population in France, the whole question of otherness, and how to how to how to cope with how to cope with otherness, and which we're facing obviously in this sort of nativist upsurge of nowadays.
It's with us still, this need
Yeah.
to see the world as us versus them, or othering,
Uh-huh.
violence against minorities, violent
Mm-hmm.
hatred against minority groups. These are
Mm-hmm.
all things that we observe in history. The story of the Protestants in Amiens, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, still mass violence for religious reasons because of religious difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we see that's why, I mean, I really like the idea of a more democratic thinking about archives and who should be able to access them. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting back to what we were talking about.
Right.
We have a summer program, a week-long summer institute for teachers, and we took the teachers to the Heinz History Center and had them looking at files in the Rau Jewish archives. And for many of those teachers, as engaged as they are with social studies and with history, they hadn't been in the archives. They
Uh-huh.
hadn't held a historical document in their hands. And
Uh-huh.
that was their favorite thing of the whole week.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and you can see from the traffic to your website too, how much interest there is in interacting with historical evidence, with the witnesses in the archive, right? So I'm so happy that we're
Uh-huh.
having this conversation and drum up some enthusiasm for this. Most people will not access archival materials in their lives. And yet in the archives, we can find inspiration to keep our curiosity active, right? Um, have conversations with people who have different experiences from ours. This is how we can address that need we see to see ourselves as different from everybody else. We're not that different from everybody else, right? We just need to be willing to talk about it. We need to be curious.
Amen, sister.
Well, I wanted to hear your thoughts. As someone who has put so much of your life into uncovering records of people who were killed
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of this kind of belief.
Well, yeah. Well, Lauren, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the deck on you here very suddenly, because what I think I've been telling you, communicating anyway, is what's making me indignant lately is something else I found in the Pitt archives when I was working there, which were applications for medical school, in Pitt Medical School in the late 1930s and early 40s. Those applications, demonstrate clearly in the form of documents that are essentially smoking guns, that the medical school had quotas for Jews. No great surprise, but they actually had separate blue books for Jewish applicants and Gentile applicants. And they made the Jews compete against Jews and the Gentiles compete against Gentiles. So they restricted admission not based on merit, but based on a certain vision. And they had quotas for women, 5%, the 10% quota for Jewish applicants, 5% for women, 5% for Italians, and then East Europeans also had their quotas. Now, to me, this represents the kind of categorical Nordic style racism. When ex-president said back in the day that he'd like immigrants from Norway, um, we see the same racial, religious, gender preference, incarnated in that thing. They're trying to preserve a kind of society that's, well, let's say a micro society, the society of physicians that is, according to their own construction, composed in a certain way. There it is. I mean, this is in the late 30s for Pitt, and we don't know because it hasn't been they haven't thoroughly explained themselves, the university.
Now, but this would fit with what we know about theories about race and racial hierarchy, racial thinking that was in this country, and it was adopted by the Nazis in Germany. That is well documented.
True.
That doesn't surprise me because we know that's our history here. We know that's the history of this country.
Well,
Not everybody knows it. So when I say we, not everybody knows it, but it reminds me of the work that you did in Amiens, telling people like, here's your history. This is our history here. And there's a lot of, I don't know if it's reluctance. I don't know if it's a lack of curiosity about how we got where we are in 2021, why racism persists, why all of these problems are still with us. It's our history. It didn't come out of nowhere.
Right. Well, wouldn't it be helpful, for instance, if it's not just that there were quotas. I mean, it didn't surprise me, but the blatant apportionment of the thing. It's like you draw a little landscaping. Who gets the slice of the pie? My point is that Pitt could do a lot of good, in this whole climate. Instead of just saying, instead of people just saying, oh, let's react to what happened at the Tree of Life, and be stronger together. If they come out and kind of discuss their own thing, and there's also like there's a reparations issue that will be normally attached to that. There was a tort that was committed. There was an act of discrimination, just like back in the discussion that was properly being mooted back about the reparations for slavery. It's not the same category of stuff, but it's a category of stuff that derooted people and from their career paths. It just shouldn't have happened. It's a tort, whether you say it's not it's not Auschwitz, but still, I just think that there's a lack of knowledge of these things. You're right. It's not that widely known outside. And when you see these documents, you say, "Whoa, wow, they did that like that," so openly."
So it's like all that excellent research that's come out about redlining, which includes, I mean, where I sit now was a neighborhood that was hostile to Jews.
Right.
And I knew that when I was getting this house, there's some satisfaction, and we wouldn't have been welcome in the 1930s, right?
Right.
So this is part of, I see what you're talking about as part of a process of truth and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to be willing. I can't speak for any of the universities, but I will speak for how we think about history in this country. We have to be willing to look at the history. This is something that historians bring. The awareness of how to do it, the willingness to take it on, ugly though it is, knowing that some people don't want to go there at all. But it's true. We can't respond. Here's my opinion. We can't respond appropriately to this moment if we're not willing to really look at our history. That this work is hard, and we're ready. I mean, at the Holocaust Center, we care about local history just as we care about history of the Holocaust, and we have to, because I mean, this is one of the obligations that we feel after the Tree of Life. It's an obligation to be honest about the threat that we're facing and not shy away from it. Wherever we see anti-Semitism, we're going to be outspoken. And that counts for 2021, and it counts for the 1930s as well.
I know. I just see, this is the thing. If you've witnessed a crime, this is my point again. If you've witnessed a crime, I bottled that up for years, and I tried to get somebody else to write the story about it. And I still sort of am, but because I don't have the vim and vigor for, so many different battles. I got one that doing well with, and I'm going to be sticking to it. But if you see something, it's this is how I felt when I saw the big archive in Paris of stuff. I thought you've kind of kept this, not secret, but almost inaccessible. I said, but I'm not going to keep the secret. I can't keep a secret. You can't get me into the club of secret keepers. I read about this guy. His name is Kurt Werner Schechter. He went over to France in 1992. He was a interesting. So I'll send you the link. You can read about him. But what he basically, in a nutshell, was his parents were both deported, one to Sobibor and one to Auschwitz, both killed Austrian refugees and resistors. He was doing some research on internment camps in France in the early 1990s, where his parents were, around Toulouse. And he, with the help of an obliging archivist, he photocopied 12,000 documents that he saw regarding these internment camps. And he took them outside the archives and distributed them to journalists. It was I'll send you the link. You can read about it. His papers are now up in Stanford at the Hoover Institute. He died about 15 years ago. But his deal was, and that was the mechanism of photocopy and give to journalists like Daniel Ellsberg. That was the original technology. Now we got the internet since 1983. But so the internet is now sort of more efficient in some ways than photocopying and distributing to journalists.
Right.
Okay, that's the end of my little technology angle. But
I had a little technology. Well, you were talking about what you were able to do, and now it's all online. The first time I was at the National Archives in England, it was right at the beginning of like a handheld digital camera. I'm dating myself.
Yeah.
So they did not like people using digital cameras to photograph the documents.
Yeah.
So I held this little camera for 14 days. Like by the end, I couldn't, my hands were jerking. I couldn't even hold anything in my grip. The next time I went back, which was 2 years later, they had copy stands where you could attach your camera. I mean, thinking in the archives evolved so quickly to realize like, this is it. People aren't going to buy thousands of photocopies today. They're going to take a picture of the document.
Right.
So that, talk about technology, that is allowed. Well, there would have been finding aids online already, but now you can really go in and you can leave with a hard drive with thousands and thousands of images.
Right. I put down, this is my other thing for my notes for this talk, about which I managed to talk about a few of the things. I have 1975, birth of digital camera. And then January 1st, 1983, important birthday, birth of the internet. Thanks to Al Gore.
So, I mean, it just changed the world of research that when I was at the Holocaust Museum and the photo archives a long time ago now, 25 years ago, just really dating myself in this interview. It's all good. We had a machine that you could put a picture in and it would print a picture. You could do a
Uh-huh.
picture from a picture.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Scanning technology, we scanned through negatives, like a negative strip is what you would send off and have it scanned. So
Yeah.
I do feel like I've had a front row seat to how all of this technology has
Yeah.
affected what researchers can do in an archive.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
now it is much more democratic. Now you can go to Jews of the
Hmm.
Sum and see all of your research online,
Hmm.
copies of the documents and photographs. So this is fun for me. This was a chance to really talk about this discipline of history that I really love so much. And now the challenge is for me, and really it's one that I take up with a lot of gratitude. And it's an honor to be able to use historical knowledge to talk to the public about what's happening all
Uh-huh.
around.
Uh-huh.
And
Great.
many historians will never get to do that. So we're doing it right now. So
Yasher
what
koach.
fun.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate the opportunity to work with the center and you and Jackie, and look forward to the next recording session.
So we'll see you again soon, and thank you for your generosity and your time and your openness to all of these subjects. Thank you.